The United States has a very high level of economic inequality relative to other countries, similar countries like the US, and yet it's often said that Americans tolerate inequality. They don't mind high levels of inequality because they don't seem to support government policies to reduce inequality, and oftentimes they're portrayed as being against government or anti-government entirely.
My name is Leslie McCall, and I'm a professor of sociology and political science at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. And I'm also the associate director of the Stone Center on Socioeconomic Inequality, which is also at the Graduate Center. If you break down questions into smaller pieces, like ask about very specific policies rather than the government's role in general, we find that Americans are very supportive of government policies that would have an impact on reducing inequality. For example, Americans are very supportive of raising taxes on high-income people. They were very opposed, large numbers of Americans were opposed to the Trump tax cuts, for example, in 2017, but those tax cuts went into effect, were passed by Congress anyway. If you look at support for policies such as Social Security, which is not seen as an explicitly redistributive policy, but in effect is redistributive, that is, does result in less economic inequality, there's very high support for Social Security spending. There's very high support for unemployment insurance. The data that we use to examine these questions comes from the General Social Survey, which is one of the main surveys used in the United States to gauge public opinion on social and political issues and economic issues in the United States. My work shows in various ways that Americans do want to reduce economic inequality. It's also the case that Americans are very supportive of taxes on the rich, increasing taxes on the rich. But the main area that I focus on is the labor market and the extent to which Americans want to see less inequality in pay and earnings and wages and compensation from the work that they do in the workplace. And it's this type of inequality that has received almost no attention from scholars or even from journalists and politicians who often talk about the issue of economic inequality. The one exception to that is that there is a discussion in the United States about minimum wages. And that's been one of the only ways that people have talked about reducing economic inequality at work in terms of reducing the differences between the wages and earnings of people who make the least in our economy and the people who make the most. We see this in referenda that have passed in so-called red states for increasing the minimum wage. So we're building on this work that is focused only on the minimum wage, and we're asking more generally, do people think that major corporations, major companies, private companies, are actually responsible for reducing economic inequality? Kind of in the same way that most questions ask whether the government is responsible for reducing economic inequality. We have some other questions in which we ask people which institution or which group is the most responsible for reducing economic inequality. And we give people the options of the government, private companies, unions, and then we also give them the options of individuals, such as like low-income individuals themselves are responsible for reducing inequality, or high-income individuals themselves are responsible for reducing inequality. We also give them the option to say that income inequality doesn't need to be reduced, primarily. So it's fairly recent data. We find that the most common answer is the government, that Americans do say that the government is the organization, the group that is most responsible for reducing economic inequality. But the next most common answer is private companies. And neither the government nor private companies reach a majority. But together, they comprise about 70% of the responses. So most people select either the government or private companies as being the major groups that are responsible for reducing economic inequality. By contrast, very few people, less than 20%, say that either income inequality doesn't need to be reduced or that low-income individuals themselves are responsible for reducing economic inequality. So I think these results overall suggest that Americans do want to have a fairer economy. They want to see economic inequality reduced through pay and through wages and through earnings and in corporations, in the market, in the workplace, as well as through some of these other policies such as higher taxes on the wealthy. Being at the Russell Sage Foundation this year has been simply phenomenal. We have an incredible group of scholars that are here this year. I could not have asked for a better group of fellow scholars. We have been able to have fun together, as well as to really discuss important issues that are going on in the world and that all of us are studying